The former head of Home Affairs just called for a royal commission into government decision-making, and the Prime Minister's response was not confidence, it was damage control. When a senior bureaucrat who spent years inside the machinery of government says the system needs a full judicial inquiry, that is not a political stunt. That is a warning. And when the government's first move is to deflect, dismiss, and downplay, you have to ask, what are they protecting? What do they not want examined? And how much of the economic chaos Australians are living through right now could have been avoided if the decisions made behind closed doors had been subject to real scrutiny? This is Oz Daily Report. Independent economic analysis, no political spin, no corporate filter, just the truth about how decisions in Canberra affect your cost of living, your financial security, and your future. If you want clarity on what is really happening in the Australian economy, hit subscribe and turn on notifications because this channel exists to cut through the noise and explain what mainstream media will not touch. So let's be absolutely clear about what just happened. Mike Pezzullo, the former Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, one of the most powerful bureaucratic positions in the country, has publicly called for a royal commission into government decision-making. Not a review, not an inquiry, a royal commission. That is the kind of investigation you call when the normal accountability mechanisms have failed, when transparency has broken down, and when the public interest demands answers that cannot be delivered through internal processes or political theater. And Albanese's response was not to welcome scrutiny, not to defend the integrity of government decision-making, but to panic, deflect, and frame the call as unnecessary, politically motivated, or unreasonable. Here is where the pressure really starts. Pezzullo is not a backbencher looking for headlines. He's not a commentator with an agenda. He is a former senior public servant who was inside the room when major decisions were being made. Decisions on immigration, border security, pandemic response, infrastructure spending, and economic policy. And when someone with that level of access and knowledge says the system needs a full judicial inquiry, it is not because everything is fine, it's because something is broken, something is being hidden, or something needs to be exposed before it does even more damage. And here is what most people are not being told. A royal commission is not just about accountability, it is about consequences. It is about putting decision-makers under oath, examining the evidence, following the money, and exposing the gap between what the government says it is doing and what it is actually doing. And that gap in the Australian economy right now is enormous. The government says it is fighting inflation, but household costs are still climbing. It says it is addressing the housing crisis, but supply is still constrained, and prices are still out of reach. It says it is delivering cost of living relief, but the measures announced are either too small, too slow, or too targeted to make a real difference for the millions of Australians who are struggling right now. So when Pezzullo calls for a royal commission, the question is not whether the government made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is whether those mistakes were the result of bad judgment, political expediency, or structural dysfunction, and whether the systems that are supposed to prevent those mistakes are actually working. And based on the government's response, the answer is almost certainly no. Here is the part that matters most. Governments do not panic over calls for accountability unless they have something to hide. If the decision-making process was sound, if the evidence was strong, if the outcomes were justified, then a royal commission would be an opportunity to vindicate the government, prove that it acted in the public interest, and restore confidence in the system. But that is not what is happening. What is happening is deflection, dismissal, and an attempt to discredit the call for scrutiny before it gains momentum. And that tells you everything you need to know about how confident the government is in its own record.
And here is where the economic logic becomes impossible to ignore. The decisions that a royal commission would examine are not abstract policy debates. They are the decisions that shaped the economy Australians are living in right now. the decisions on pandemic spending that added billions to the national debt, the decisions on immigration that failed to match population growth with housing supply, the decisions on energy policy that left Australians paying some of the highest electricity prices in the world, the decisions on infrastructure that prioritized political announcements over actual delivery. Every one of those decisions has consequences, and those consequences are being paid for by ordinary Australians through higher costs, lower living standards, and a system that no longer works for them. So here is the judgment. Albanese's panic over a royal commission is not about protecting the integrity of government, it's about protecting the government from scrutiny. Because a royal commission would expose the gap between what the government says it is doing and what it is actually doing, between the promises it makes and the outcomes it delivers, and between the interests it claims to serve and the interests it actually protects. And Pezzullo knows this. He knows how decisions are made. He knows where the pressure points are. He knows which decisions were driven by evidence and which were driven by politics. And when someone with that level of knowledge calls for a full judicial inquiry, it is not a casual suggestion. It is a warning that the system is failing, that accountability has broken down, and that the public interest is not being served. And here is where the structural problem becomes impossible to ignore. The Australian economy is not struggling because of bad luck, global forces, or foreseeable circumstances. It is struggling because of decisions made by governments, institutions, and bureaucrats who prioritized short-term political outcomes over long-term economic stability. Decisions to flood the economy with cheap credit without worrying about asset bubbles. Decisions to suppress interest rates for years without addressing supply-side constraints. Decisions to spend billions on stimulus without a plan to unwind it. Decisions to delay infrastructure, constrain housing supply, and protect incumbents at the expense of new entrants. And all of those decisions were made behind closed doors, without full transparency, without real accountability, and without the kind of scrutiny that a royal commission would bring. And now, as the consequences of those decisions are crushing household budgets across the country, the government's response is not to admit mistakes, not to learn lessons, not to change course, but to panic when someone suggests examining what actually happened. This is not about ideology. This is not about left or right. This is about accountability, transparency, and the basic principle that governments should be held accountable for the decisions they make and the outcomes they deliver. And when a former senior bureaucrat says the system needs a royal commission, the only responsible response is to ask why, examine the evidence, and let the inquiry proceed. Anything else is a cover-up. And here is where the economic reality becomes painfully clear. Australians are paying for bad decisions every single day. They are paying through higher mortgage repayments, higher rent, higher grocery bills, higher fuel costs, and a cost of living that has spiraled out of control while wages have barely moved. So when Pezzullo calls for a full inquiry, he is not just questioning the government's record, he's questioning the system itself. He is questioning whether the checks and balances that are supposed to prevent bad decisions are actually working, whether the public interest is being protected, and whether Australians are being told the truth about how their economy is being managed. And Pezzullo knows this. He knows that the system is broken. He knows that accountability has failed, and he knows that without a full judicial inquiry, nothing will change. The same decisions will be made, the same mistakes will be repeated, the same people will pay the price. So here is the question Albanese needs to answer. If the government has nothing to hide, why is it so afraid of a royal commission? If the decisions were sound, why not let them be examined? If the outcomes were justified, why not prove it? Because the only reason to